I'll be replacing this Boxster. It's a Becker 220 CD player that stopped working on me. The display wasn't lighting up. None of the buttons were doing anything, and I couldn't get any sound out of it. So I'm going to be replacing it with this aftermarket unit, this Kenwood here, and just go over some of the things that I'm using for it and what you'll need. I have this 101 projects book, and in it, it has all the wiring labeled. So it's a very good resource to have for this and for other projects. If you own a 986, I highly recommend it. Then what I did was label the wiring harness that came with the aftermarket unit according to the instructions in the aftermarket unit itself. I'm going to go through, and next to these I'm going to write the color of the wire on the Boxster that I'm going to have to wire it to, and some of that information is located on top of the CD player itself. So that'll tell you exactly what the pin and the wire that's connected to the back of it, what the function of that is. And looking inside here, one thing that you're going to need is an aftermarket antenna adapter. So this comes from the car, and on the old head unit you'll see it would go right there on that mount. But the new unit doesn't have an external mount, it has an internal, so you need an adapter for it. This costs like $7 on Amazon, or around $13 from Best Buy or a local auto parts store. And then these are the wires I'll be cutting here. And mine only has a yellow connector. I know some have a brown and a green one. And I picked up from Harbor Freight these two heat shrink butt connectors. Both of these cost $5 total for the two of them, and I'm hoping that does the trick. First thing I'm going to do is disconnect the negative terminal of the battery. So in the front, right here in the center, that's where the battery is located. So you just have to turn these two clips sideways there, and then this guy should just pop up for you. That comes out, and then you'll see negative terminal over here. That came off easily with the 10mm socket, and what I like to do is when I disconnect a battery terminal, I like to put it somewhere where it's not going to come accidentally back into contact with the battery itself. I'm going to try to do this without any kind of wiring harness adapter. The only thing that was a little bit tricky to figure out, you'll see where it says yellow connector, pin 3, common audio ground. So looking at the wiring harnesses from the car itself, you'll see 4 wires here that come into a single common ground, and that's the pin it's talking about. So I only have the black harness and the yellow one, so I'm gonna disconnect this up here and then separate those grounds out and reconnect those grounds separately to the harness that came with the head unit itself. And then these other wires are labeled pretty well in the book, and same with this harness here. I'm attaching these butt end connectors right now to the wires that came off of that yellow harness, And the wires there are pretty thin, so what I did with the majority of them was I stripped them back far enough where I could bend them back over on themselves, just to give the connector a little bit something bigger to bite on. Then I'm taking these locking pliers, making sure I got a good crimp on it, and then just giving it a little tug, make sure it's on there securely. And I'm gonna connect all of them first to make sure the radio works before I go ahead and hit it with a lighter. I have everything wired up, and before I test the radio, I'm just gonna show you this wire to disconnect on the left hand side of where your original factory radio mounts. It's a blue and brown wire back there, and you're just gonna pull it off, and that's gonna stop the car from setting off the alarm with your new aftermarket radio. You just reach back in there, you pull the wire off of its mount, and then you can put electrical tape over the end of it. And that's what the end looks right there. One more thing to note, I did switch from the channel locks to just using regular old pliers. I think it's a little bit easier just to get all the force you can on there and then not have to worry about locking it and unlocking it for each connection. So it's working. Everything looks good. So as you saw, just make sure that you test to make sure everything's working okay before you fully install the radio. Test it with it just sitting in there loosely. Then last thing I'm going to do is come back and hit this shrink wrap here. So this is what they look like after they've been shrink wrapped. Just make sure that you move the flame around a decent amount so you're not just putting a lot of heat on one wire. Just move it around a lot, hit the different wires, come back to it if you want it to shrink some more, and eventually you'll get them all. It takes around maybe 5 minutes to do all of them. This is what the antenna adapter looks like. It costs $7 on Amazon. You just plug one end into the antenna wire coming from the car, and then you're going to plug the other end into the back of the head unit. The last step is going to be to reconnect the negative terminal of your battery. And looking online, I found instructions for a relearn procedure for your ECU whenever you disconnect the battery. It says to switch the ignition on, but don't start the engine. Time it for around a minute, and then switch ignition off and remove key for 10 to 15 seconds, and then start the car as normal. And usually it takes around 5 cycles of going around driving your car for the ECU to relearn. And if you have any issues with your windows as well, I came across a relearn procedure for that that says to hold down 10 seconds after your windows go full down, hold the up switch 10 seconds after they go full up, and then hold the down switch 10 seconds again after full down. Hope that helps.